The summer heat in Copper Creek, Arizona territory, was the kind that made a man's shirt stick to his back before he even stepped outside. It was 1887, and the small mining town was baking under the relentless desert sun. Inside Murphy's saloon, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of cheap whiskey. Cowboys, miners, and drifters sat at wooden tables, their voices mixing with the sound of cards being shuffled and coins hitting the bar. Ethan Morrison sat alone in the corner, nursing his third whiskey of the afternoon, his weathered hands wrapped around the glass like it was the only thing keeping him steady. At 32, Ethan looked older than his years. The Arizona sun had carved deep lines around his pale blue eyes, and his dark hair was already showing streaks of gray at the temples. He wore the same clothes he'd been wearing for weeks: dusty leather chaps, a faded blue shirt, and boots that had walked too many miles on hard ground. Ethan wasn't really listening to the conversations around him. His mind was somewhere else, lost in memories he'd been trying to drown for the past 9 years. The whiskey helped, but it never made the guilt go away completely. He'd been drifting from town to town, working cattle drives and odd jobs, always moving, never staying anywhere long enough to form real connections with people. The saloon doors suddenly burst open with a loud bang, making every man in the place look up from his drink. A small figure stumbled inside, and Ethan's blood went cold. It was a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with long dark hair that hung loose around her shoulders. Her dress was torn and dirty, and tears had left clean tracks down her dusty cheeks. "Please," the girl cried out, her voice breaking with desperation. "Please, somebody help me." The saloon went dead quiet. Even the piano player stopped mid-song. Every eye in the room turned to stare at this child who had burst into their adult world of drinking and gambling. "Sir, my mom is too sick. She can't take more pain." The little girl's whisper cut through the silence like a knife. Her dark eyes swept across the room, looking from face to face, searching for someone who might care enough to help. Ethan's hand froze halfway to his mouth, the whiskey glass trembling in his grip. Something about the child's voice, about the way she stood there so small and desperate, hit him like a physical blow. His heart started pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Most of the men in the saloon looked uncomfortable. They shifted in their chairs and stared down at their drinks, not wanting to get involved. A couple of them muttered under their breath about children not belonging in saloons. But the little girl didn't give up. "My mama, she's burning up with fever," the child continued, her voice getting stronger even as tears rolled down her face. "She can't even sit up anymore. The doctor said there's nothing more he can do." Ethan's throat felt like sandpaper. He couldn't take his eyes off the girl. There was something familiar about her features, something that made his chest tight with an emotion he'd been running from for years. "Now hold on there, little miss," called out Murphy, the saloon owner, from behind the bar. He was a big Irish man with red cheeks and kind eyes. "What's your name? Where's your mom at?" "Ellen," the girl said, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Ellen Chun. My mama's Nora. We live in the old cabin past Miller's Creek." The name hit Ethan like a lightning bolt. Nora Chun. He nearly dropped his glass, his hand shaking so badly he had to set it down on the table with a loud clink. Nora. After 9 years, he'd never expected to hear that name again. Murphy scratched his beard, thinking, "Chun, that's the half-breed woman lives out by herself, ain't it? I heard she was poorly." Ethan's jaw clenched at the word half-breed, but he stayed silent, frozen in his chair like a man who'd seen a ghost. Ellen nodded frantically. "Yes, that's her. She's Chinese and Irish, and she's the best mama in the whole world. But she's so sick, and I don't know what to do anymore." Some of the men in the saloon exchanged glances. Ethan could see the looks on their faces, the mixture of pity and prejudice that he remembered all too well. Nora had always faced those looks. Her mixed heritage made her an outsider in most places, accepted by neither the Chinese community nor the white settlers. "Please," Ellen said again, her voice breaking. She took a step further into the saloon, her small hands clasped together in front of her. "I bet everyone in town. Mrs. Patterson said she's too busy. The preacher said he'd pray for Mama, but that ain't gonna make her fever go away. I need someone to help me take care of her." Ethan's mind was racing. Ellen Shun, Nora's daughter. The math was simple and terrible. 9 years ago, he'd left Nora without knowing she was carrying his child. This little girl with her dark hair and desperate eyes. She could be his daughter. "You look kind," Ellen said suddenly, and Ethan realized she was looking right at him. "Please, mister. You got nice eyes. I bet you know about taking care of sick folks." Ethan's heart nearly stopped. The child had walked across the saloon and was standing right next to his table, looking up at him with such hope and trust that it made him feel sick with shame. Up close, he could see Nora in her features, the shape of her eyes, the stubborn set of her small jaw. "I." Ethan's voice came out as a croak. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I don't know nothing about doctoring, little girl. But you'll help anyway, won't you?" Ellen reached out and touched his hand with her small fingers. "I can tell you're a good man. Mama always said good men are hard to find, but when you do find one, you hold on to him tight." The words were like a dagger to Ethan's heart. He remembered Nora saying almost the exact same thing to him, back when they were young and in love and planning to build a life together. Ethan stood up slowly, his legs unsteady. Every man in the saloon was watching him now, waiting to see what he would do. He looked down at Ellen's upturned face, at the hope shining in her dark eyes, and felt something crack open inside his chest. "All right," he said quietly. "All right, I'll come with you." The relief that washed over Ellen's face was almost too much to bear. She grabbed his hand with both of hers and started pulling him toward the door. "Thank you, mister." "Oh, thank you. Mama's going to be so happy that someone finally came to help." As Ethan let himself be led out of the saloon, he caught Murphy's eye. The older man gave him a respectful nod, the kind of acknowledgement one man gives another when he sees him doing something difficult but right. The afternoon sun hit Ethan like a furnace as they stepped outside. Ellen was chattering now, the words tumbling out of her in her relief at finding help. "Mama's been sick for 3 days now," she said, still holding tight to his hand. "First she just felt tired, but then she got the shakes and the fever. She keeps saying my papa's name, but I don't know who that is. Mama never talks about my papa." Ethan's steps faltered for just a moment, but Ellen didn't notice. She was too focused on getting him to her mother, too desperate for help to see the way his face had gone pale. As they walked through the dusty streets of Copper Creek, past the general store and the blacksmith shop, Ethan's mind was filled with memories of Nora. Her laugh, the way she used to braid wildflowers in her long black hair, the dreams they'd shared of building a ranch together. And the terrible day when he'd realized he wasn't brave enough to face the town's judgment about their relationship. Now, 9 years later, he was walking toward a reckoning he'd never thought he'd have to face. The walk to Miller's Creek felt like the longest mile Ethan had ever traveled. Ellen skipped alongside him, chattering about her mama and pointing out landmarks along the way. But Ethan barely heard her words. His mind was stuck 9 years in the past, remembering the last time he'd walked this same dusty path. "That's where the old mine used to be," Ellen said, pointing to a boarded-up shaft in the hillside. "Mama says it played out years ago, before I was born. She knows lots of stories about this place." Ethan nodded without really listening. He remembered that mine. He and Nora used to meet there when they were courting, back when he was young and brave enough to think love could conquer anything. Back before he learned what a coward he really was. The cabin came into view as they rounded a bend in the creek. It was smaller than Ethan remembered, and in worse repair. The wooden walls had weathered to a dull gray, and the roof sagged in places where shingles had blown away. A thin line of smoke rose from the chimney, the only sign that anyone still lived there. "Mama," Ellen called out as they approached the front door. "Mama, I found help. I found a nice man who's going to make you feel better." Ethan's hands were shaking again. He wanted to turn around and run, just like he had 9 years ago. But Ellen's small hand was still gripping his, and her trust in him was like a chain he couldn't break. The door opened slowly, and Ethan's heart nearly stopped. Nora Chin stood in the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame. She was thinner than he remembered, and her long black hair now had streaks of silver at the temples. Her face was flushed with fever, and her dark eyes were bright and glassy. But even sick and aged by years of hardship, she was still beautiful. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Nora's fevered eyes went wide with shock and something that might have been fear. Ethan felt like he couldn't breathe. "You," Nora whispered, her voice barely audible. After all these years, Ellen looked back and forth between them, confused by the tension in the air. "Mama, do you know this man? He was in the saloon, and when I asked for help, he was the only one who said yes." Nora's legs seemed to give out, and she slumped against the doorframe. Ethan stepped forward instinctively, reaching out to steady her, but she pulled back from his touch. "Don't," she said, her voice stronger now, edged with old pain. "Just don't." "Nora, you're sick," Ethan said quietly. "Ellen came looking for help, and I couldn't say no." "Of course you couldn't," Nora replied with a bitter laugh that turned into a coughing fit. Ethan Morrison, always doing the right thing when someone's watching. Ellen tugged on Ethan's sleeve. "How do you know my mama's name?" "She never told me about any Ethan." The innocent question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Nora and Ethan looked at each other over the child's head, and Ethan saw a warning in Nora's fevered eyes. "Your mama and I knew each other a long time ago," Ethan said carefully. "Before you were born." Nora straightened up with visible effort. "Ellen, honey, go inside and put some water on a boil. This gentleman won't be staying long." But Ellen wasn't easily dismissed. She planted her small feet firmly and crossed her arms. "He came all this way to help you, Mama. You're being rude." "Ellen." "No, Mama. You're sick and you need help, and I don't care if you knew him before or not. He's here now, and that's what matters." Ethan found himself almost smiling at the child's stubborn determination. She had her mother's iron will, that was certain. "She's right, Nora," Ethan said quietly. "You need help, and I'm here. We can settle old scores after you're feeling better." Nora looked like she wanted to argue, but another coughing fit doubled her over. Ethan stepped forward again, and this time she was too weak to pull away. He put his arm around her shoulders and helped her back inside the cabin. The interior was clean but sparse. A few pieces of worn furniture, a stone fireplace, and a narrow bed in the corner where Nora had obviously been lying. The air smelled of sickness and the herbs Ellen had been brewing for her mother. Ethan helped Nora to the bed, and she collapsed onto it gratefully. Up close, he could see how bad her condition really was. Her skin was burning hot, and her breathing was shallow and labored. "How long has she been like this?" Ethan asked Ellen. 3 days, Ellen said, wringing her hands. "Maybe 4. She keeps getting worse no matter what I do." Ethan knelt beside the bed and looked down at Nora's flushed face. Even through her fever, he could see the years of struggle written in the lines around her eyes. Life had not been kind to her after he left. "Nora," he said softly, "what happened to you? How did you end up here, alone with—" He glanced at Ellen, who was watching them intently. "With my daughter?" Nora finished, her voice sharp despite her weakness. "Is that what you want to know, Ethan? What happened after you ran away?" Ellen's eyes went wide. "Mama, what do you mean he ran away?" Nora closed her eyes, and Ethan saw tears leak from the corners. "I mean, this man was supposed to marry me once. We had it all planned out. But when push came to shove, when the town started talking about him taking up with a half-breed woman, he decided his reputation was more important than his promises." Ethan felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "Nora, it wasn't that simple, wasn't it?" Nora opened her eyes and looked at him with all the pain and anger of 9 years. "You said you loved me. You said it didn't matter what anyone thought. But when your friends started making jokes, when the respectable folks started looking at you sideways, suddenly it mattered plenty. Ellen was staring at Ethan now, her young face trying to understand the adult pain swirling around her. "You were going to marry my mama?" Ethan's throat felt tight. "Yes. Yes, I was. But you left instead." The simple question, asked in a child's clear voice, hit harder than all of Nora's accusations. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. "Why?" Ellen asked. Ethan looked at this little girl with her mother's eyes and her stubborn chin and felt the weight of his cowardice settle on his shoulders like a stone. "Because I was scared," he said finally. "Because I was young and stupid, and I thought what other people said mattered more than doing what was right." Nora let out a shaky breath. "At least you're honest about it now." Ethan was studying Ellen's face, doing the math he'd been afraid to do. The child was 8, maybe 9 years old. If Nora had been pregnant when he left. "Nora," he said quietly. Is she what, Ethan?" Nora's voice was cold as winter wind. Ethan looked at Ellen again, seeing himself in the set of her shoulders, in the pale blue of her eyes that were so different from her mother's dark brown ones. "Is she mine?" The words hung in the air like smoke. Ellen's mouth fell open, and she looked back and forth between them with growing understanding. Nora was quiet for a long moment, her fevered eyes studying Ethan's face. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "She's your daughter, Ethan. Ellen is yours." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Ethan had to grab the edge of the bed to steady himself. All these years, he'd had a daughter, a child who grew up without a father because he'd been too much of a coward to face a little gossip. My papa," Ellen whispered, staring at Ethan with wide eyes. Ethan couldn't find his voice. He looked at this beautiful, brave little girl who had burst into his life with a desperate plea for help, and realized that fate had just handed him the chance to face the biggest mistake of his life. "Yes, honey," Nora said softly, reaching for Ellen's hand. "This is your papa." Ellen took a step toward Ethan, then stopped, uncertainty written all over her young face. "If you're my papa, then why weren't you here? Why didn't you take care of me and Mama?" The questions were like knives to Ethan's heart. He deserved every one of them, and worse. "Because I was a fool," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Because I made the worst mistake a man can make, and I've been paying for it every day since." Nora's breathing was getting more labored, and her fever seemed to be climbing higher. Ethan pushed aside his own emotional turmoil and focused on what mattered right now. "We need to get you to a doctor," he said. "Doc Miller already came by yesterday," Ellen said. "He said there wasn't nothing more he could do, so we just had to wait and pray." Ethan felt panic rising in his chest. After 9 years of running from his mistakes, he'd finally found Nora and his daughter, and now he might lose them both. "There's got to be something," he said desperately. "Some medicine, some treatment." "The nearest real doctor is in Tucson," Nora whispered. "That's 3 days' ride, and I don't think I have 3 days." Ellen started crying again, quiet tears that broke Ethan's heart. He looked at his daughter, and made a decision that would change everything. "Then I'll bring the doctor here," he said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Ethan stared at Ellen, his mind reeling from the truth that had just shattered his world. This little girl was his daughter, his flesh and blood, who had grown up without him because of his cowardice. The weight of 9 lost years pressed down on him like a mountain. "Papa," Ellen said softly, testing the word on her tongue. She took a tentative step toward him, her young face a mixture of hope and confusion. "Are you really my papa?" Ethan's throat felt like sandpaper. He wanted to reach out to her, to hold her close and promise he'd never leave again. But what right did he have? He was a stranger to his own child. "Yes," he managed to whisper. "Yes, I am." Ellen's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. Instead, she straightened her small shoulders with the same stubborn dignity Ethan had seen in her mother. "Then where have you been?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tears. "Mama gets sad sometimes, and she won't tell me why. She looks at my eyes and gets this hurt look on her face. Was it because of you? The simple honesty of the question cut deeper than any accusation could have. Ethan looked at Nora, who was watching him through her fever, waiting to see what he would say to their daughter. Yes, Ethan said, the word coming out rough and painful. Yes, it was because of me. I left your mama when I should have stayed. I was scared of what people would think. People like the mean ladies at the store? Ellen asked. The ones who whisper when we walk by. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. Even as a child, Ellen had faced the prejudice he'd been too cowardly to confront. Yes, he said, people like that. Ellen studied his face with those pale blue eyes that were so much like his own. Mama always told me that what people think doesn't matter as much as what's right. She said good people don't care what you look like or where you come from. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. Nora had been teaching their daughter lessons he'd been too weak to learn himself. Nora's breathing suddenly became more labored, and she let out a soft moan of pain. Both Ethan and Ellen rushed to her side. Mama, Ellen said, her voice scared. Mama, don't leave me. Ethan felt Nora's forehead. Her fever was getting worse, burning through her like wildfire. Her dark eyes were glassy and unfocused. We need help, Ethan said urgently. Real help, not just what Doc Miller can do. There's nobody else, Ellen said, fresh tears starting to fall. I already asked everybody in town. Ethan stood up, his mind racing. Tucson was 3 days away by horse, and Nora didn't have 3 days. But maybe there was another way. I'm going to town, he said firmly. There's got to be someone, something. Don't you leave. Ellen grabbed his arm with surprising strength. Don't you dare leave us again. The desperation in her voice stopped Ethan cold. He knelt down, so he was eye level with his daughter. Ellen, I'm not leaving you. I'm going to get help for your mama. I promise I'll come back. You promised before, Ellen whispered. Mama told me. You promised to marry her, and then you left. The accusation from his 8-year-old daughter's lips was more devastating than anything Nora could have said. Ethan felt something break open inside his chest. You're right, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I did promise before, and I broke that promise. I was a coward and a fool. But I'm not that same man anymore, Ellen. I won't leave you and your mama again. Not ever. Nora stirred on the bed, her fevered eyes focusing on Ethan with difficulty. Don't make promises you can't keep, she whispered. I can keep this one, Ethan said, looking directly at her. I should have kept the first one, but I was too scared. I'm not scared anymore. He stood up and headed for the door. I'm going to find Doc Miller and make him come back. Then I'm riding to the mining camp. Tom Reeves might have medicine up there. The mining camp? Nora tried to sit up. Ethan, that's dangerous. There's been Apache raids. I don't care, Ethan said firmly. I'm not losing you again. Either of you. He paused at the door and looked back at Ellen. Take care of your mama while I'm gone. Can you do that? Ellen nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. I've been taking care of her for 3 days already. The simple statement broke Ethan's heart all over again. This little girl had been carrying a burden no child should have to bear, all because he hadn't been there. The ride back to town felt different this time. Ethan's mind was clear, focused on a single purpose. He had a daughter to save, and a woman he'd never stopped loving despite the years and the guilt and the shame. He found Doc Miller at his small office behind the general store. The old physician looked surprised to see him. Morrison, what are you doing back here? Thought you moved on by now. I need you to come back to the Chun place, Ethan said without preamble. Nora's getting worse. Doc Miller shook his gray head sadly. Son, I told you there wasn't much I could do. She's got pneumonia, maybe something worse. Without proper medicine. Then we get proper medicine, Ethan interrupted. What would she need? If you could get anything, what would help her? The doctor studied Ethan's face, seeing something there that hadn't been present earlier. Well, there's laudanum for the pain, and quinine if we could get it. But the nearest place that would have supplies like that. The mining camp, Ethan finished. Tom Reeves might have a medicine chest. That's a hard ride, Morrison, and dangerous. The Apache had been active in those hills. Ethan was already heading for the door. I'll take that chance. Wait, Doc Miller called out. He grabbed his medical bag from the desk. If you're fool enough to make that ride, then I'm fool enough to come back with you and do what I can. The two men rode hard back to the cabin, where they found Ellen sitting beside her mother's bed, singing softly. Nora was unconscious now, her breathing shallow and rapid. Doc Miller examined her again, his face grim. She's worse. The fever's higher, and her lungs are filling up. Without medicine, he didn't finish the sentence. Ethan looked at his daughter, who was watching the adults with frightened eyes. How long does she have? Maybe through the night. Maybe not. Ellen started crying again, quiet tears that tore at Ethan's heart. He knelt beside her and took her small hands in his. Ellen, I have to go get medicine for your mama. It's going to be dangerous, and I might not make it back in time. Then don't go, Ellen whispered. Stay with us. Please don't leave us alone again. Ethan felt tears burning his own eyes. Sweetheart, if I don't go, your mama might die. I can't let that happen. Not when I finally found you both. Ellen was quiet for a moment, thinking with the serious expression of a child forced to grow up too fast. If you go, she said finally, and something happens to you, then Mama and I will be all alone forever. Nothing's going to happen to me, Ethan said, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. I promise. You keep saying that word, Ellen said softly. Promise. But what if you can't keep it this time either? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Ethan looked at his daughter, then at Nora's still form on the bed. He thought about all the years he'd run from responsibility, from commitment, from anything that required real courage. Then I'll die trying, he said simply, because that's what a man does for his family. Ellen stared at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. Okay, Papa, go get the medicine. But you come back to us. You hear me? You come back. Ethan kissed her forehead gently. I hear you, little girl. I'll be back. As he prepared to leave for the mining camp, Ethan caught Doc Miller's eye. The old physician nodded grimly. I'll stay with them, the doctor said quietly. And Morrison? Ride fast. Ethan mounted his horse and looked back at the cabin one more time. Through the window, he could see Ellen sitting beside her mother's bed, holding Nora's hand. His family, the family he'd abandoned once and found again by the grace of God. This time, he wouldn't fail them. This time, he'd be the man they deserved. The ride to the mining camp took Ethan through some of the most dangerous territory in Arizona. The narrow mountain trail wound between towering red rocks and deep ravines where Apache warriors could hide in the shadows. But Ethan's mind wasn't on the danger. All he could think about was Ellen's tear-streaked face and Nora's labored breathing. His horse, a sturdy bay mare named Belle, picked her way carefully up the rocky path. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky blood red. Soon it would be dark, and traveling these trails at night was asking for trouble. But Ethan didn't slow down. Every minute counted now. The mining camp sat in a valley between two hills, a collection of rough wooden buildings and canvas tents where men dug for silver and dreamed of striking it rich. Ethan could see the glow of campfires and hear the distant sound of voices as he approached. Tom Reeves was sitting outside his tent, cleaning his rifle when Ethan rode up. Tom was an old friend from Ethan's cowboy days, a grizzled man with gray hair and scars from too many fights. He looked up in surprise as Ethan dismounted. Ethan Morrison, what the hell are you doing up here after dark? I need help, Tom, Ethan said without preamble. Medical supplies, medicine, whatever you've got. Tom studied his friend's desperate expression. What's the trouble? There's a woman dying down in Copper Creek. Pneumonia. She needs laudanum, quinine, anything that might help. Woman. Tom raised an eyebrow. Since when do you care about? He stopped mid-sentence, seeing something in Ethan's face that made him reconsider. This is serious, ain't it? She's the mother of my daughter, Ethan said quietly. A daughter I didn't know I had until today. Tom let out a low whistle. Well, that changes things. He stood up and gestured toward his tent. Come on, I got a medicine chest from my army days. Might have something useful. Inside the tent, Tom rummaged through a wooden box filled with bottles and packages. Got some laudanum here, and this might be quinine. He held up a small vial. Can't promise it's still good, but it's worth a try. How much do you want for it? Ethan asked, reaching for his wallet. Tom waved him off. Nothing. A man's got to take care of his family. He paused. But Ethan, you know these hills ain't safe at night. Apache have been raiding the smaller camps. You sure you want to risk the ride back in the dark? Ethan thought about Ellen sitting beside her mother's bed, holding Nora's fevered hand. I don't have a choice. Then take this too, Tom said, handing Ethan an extra rifle. And stay on the main trail. Don't take any shortcuts. The ride back down the mountain was a nightmare of shadows and strange sounds. Every rustle in the bushes could be an Apache warrior. Every rock formation could hide an ambush. But Ethan pushed Belle hard, trusting her sure footing and his own instincts to get them through. Halfway down a mountain, Belle suddenly shied and nearly threw him. Ethan pulled her up short, his heart pounding. Then he heard it, the sound of horses moving through the brush nearby. Apache, most likely, tracking him. Ethan urged Belle forward, try to move quietly but quickly. The sounds followed them for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, the sounds faded away. Whatever had been out there had decided he wasn't worth the trouble. By the time Ethan reached the cabin, it was past midnight. The windows glowed with lamplight, and he could see Doc Miller's silhouette moving around inside. Ethan's heart clenched as he wondered if he was too late. He burst through the door to find Ellen exactly where he'd left her, holding her mother's hand. Nora was still breathing, but barely. Her skin was pale as winter snow, and her lips had a blue tinge that made Ethan's blood run cold. Did you get it? Doc Miller asked immediately. Ethan handed over the medicine. Laudanum and what might be quinine. It's old, but Tom thought it might still work. Doc Miller examined the bottles quickly. It's worth trying. He began preparing doses immediately, his weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency. Ellen looked up at Ethan with exhausted eyes. I didn't think you were coming back, she whispered. I told you I would, Ethan said, kneeling beside her. I keep my promises now. Doc Miller administered the medicine, and they waited. Nora's breathing seemed to ease slightly, and some color returned to her cheeks. It wasn't much, but it was something. Now we wait, the doctor said. Either the medicine will help, or... He didn't finish the sentence. Ethan sat down on the other side of the bed and took Nora's other hand. Her skin was still hot with fever, but her breathing was definitely easier. Over the next 3 days, Nora's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. The fever broke completely, and her breathing returned to normal. Color came back to her cheeks, and she was able to sit up and take proper meals. Doc Miller declared it the finest example of medicine working exactly as it should. But the physical healing was easier than the emotional wounds that still lay open between Ethan and Nora. Ellen, meanwhile, had attached herself to Ethan like a shadow. She followed him everywhere, to the well when he drew water, to the woodpile when he split logs, to the creek when he watered Belle. She peppered him with questions about everything. Papa, why do you have that scar on your hand? She asked one morning as they sat on the porch steps. Ethan looked down at the white line across his knuckles. Got that from a bull's horn when I was working cattle in Texas. Me and old bull didn't like me much. Ellen traced the scar with her small finger. Did it hurt real bad? For a while. But scars fade, and the hurt goes away eventually. Ellen nodded solemnly. Mama has scars too. Not on her skin, but inside. She gets sad sometimes and stares out the window like she's looking for something that ain't there. Ethan's throat tightened. Maybe she was looking for me. Were you looking for her too? The simple question cut straight to his heart. Every day, Ellen. Every single day. That afternoon, while Ellen napped, Nora finally felt strong enough for the conversation they'd been avoiding. She sat in the rocking chair by the window, and Ethan pulled up a wooden stool beside her. "We need to talk about what happens now," Nora said quietly. Ethan nodded. "I know. Do you? Because 3 days ago, you were just a drifter passing through town. Now Ellen thinks you're going to stay forever and be her papa." "I am her papa. Being a father is more than just blood, Ethan. It's about being there every morning when she wakes up and every night when she goes to sleep. It's about staying when things get hard, not just when there's a crisis to solve." Ethan was quiet for a moment, watching Ellen sleep peacefully on the bed. "You're right. I haven't earned that yet. But I want to. I want to learn how to be the father she deserves." Nora studied his face. "What about when the town starts talking again? When people remember why you left before? Let them talk. I've spent 9 years caring what other people think. I'm done with that. It's not that simple, Ethan. Ellen will hear the whispers. She'll see the looks. Are you strong enough to shield her from that?" Ethan thought about the ride through a patchy country, about the fear and the darkness and the determination that had driven him forward. "I'm strong enough for whatever comes. I have to be." Nora was quiet for a long time, rocking slowly in her chair. Finally, she spoke again. "Do you remember what you said to me the night before you left? You said you loved me more than life itself, but you couldn't face the shame of being married to someone like me." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He remembered that night, remembered the fight that had driven him away. "Nora, I was young and stupid and scared," she finished. "You were scared of what your friends would think, scared of what the respectable folks would say, scared of being looked down on for loving a half-breed woman." Ethan flinched at the word. "Don't say that about yourself." "Why not? It's what they all called me, what they still call me." Nora's voice was steady, but Ethan could hear the old pain underneath. "The question is, are you still that scared young man?" Ethan looked out the window at the town of Copper Creek spread out below them. He thought about the gossips in Murphy's saloon, about the women who whispered behind their hands at church, about all the small-minded people who had driven him away before. "No," he said firmly, "I'm not that man anymore. That man was a coward who ran from the best thing that ever happened to him. I won't make that mistake again." Ellen stirred on the bed and opened her sleepy eyes. "Mama? Papa? Why are you talking so serious?" Nora smiled and held out her arms. Ellen climbed onto her lap and snuggled against her shoulder. "We're just figuring some things out, baby girl. Are you figuring out if Papa's going to stay with us?" Nora looked at Ethan over their daughter's head. "Are you, Ethan? Really and truly this time?" Ethan knelt down beside the rocking chair, so he was eye level with both of them. "Ellen, what would you think if I bought us a little ranch outside of town? Somewhere we could have horses and cattle and a big garden." Ellen's eyes lit up. "Really? We could live there together? All three of us?" "All three of us," Ethan confirmed. "If your mama says yes." Ellen turned to Nora with pleading eyes. "Say yes, Mama. Please say yes." Nora looked at Ethan for a long moment. He could see her weighing his words against his past actions, hope warring with caution in her dark eyes. "I need more than pretty words this time, Ethan. I need proof that you mean it." "What kind of proof?" Nora was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. "There's a church social next Sunday. The whole town will be there. If you're serious about this, about us, then you'll come with Ellen and me. You'll walk in there with your family and let everyone see that you're not ashamed of us." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. A church social meant facing everyone at once. All the gossips and judges and respectable folks who had driven him away before. It meant publicly claiming Nora and Ellen as his family. Consequences be damned. "Mama," Ellen said softly, "what if people are mean to us? Then we'll face it together," Ethan said before Nora could answer. "All three of us, together." He stood up and looked down at his family. "Nora, I'll be proud to walk into that church social with you on my arm and Ellen holding my hand. Let them all see that Ethan Morrison finally grew up enough to know what really matters." Nora's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "All right then. Sunday it is." Ellen clapped her hands with delight. "We're going to be a real family." Ethan reached out, and touched his daughter's cheek gently. "We already are, sweetheart. We already are." Outside the window, the sun was setting over Copper Creek, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. For the first time in 9 years, Ethan Morrison felt like he was home. But Sunday was still coming, and with it, the real test of whether he had truly changed or was still the same coward who had run away all those years ago. Sunday morning arrived bright and clear, but Ethan's stomach was tied in knots. He stood in front of the small mirror in Nora's cabin, trying to make himself presentable for church. His hands shook slightly as he combed his hair and straightened his collar. Ellen bounced around the cabin in her best dress, a simple blue frock that Nora had mended carefully. "Papa, are you nervous?" she asked, noticing his pale complexion. "A little," Ethan admitted. There was no point in lying to his daughter. Nora emerged from behind the curtain that divided the sleeping area, wearing a modest green dress that brought out the color in her eyes. She looked beautiful, and Ethan felt his heart skip a beat just like it had 9 years ago. "You ready for this?" Nora asked quietly. Ethan took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." The walk to the white wooden church at the center of town felt like the longest mile Ethan had ever traveled. Ellen skipped between her parents, holding both their hands and chattering about the flowers they passed. But Ethan could feel the weight of curious stares from every porch and window they passed. The church steps were crowded with families greeting each other before the service. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as the three of them approached. Ethan felt Nora's hand tighten on his arm, and he squeezed back reassuringly. "Well, I'll be damned," someone muttered from the crowd. Ethan recognized Bannon Quaid, the same man who had gossiped about him on that train so long ago. Mrs. Patterson, the saloon owner's wife, stepped forward with a surprised smile. "Ethan Morrison? Is that really you?" Her eyes moved to Nora and Ellen, putting the pieces together quickly. "Mrs. Patterson," Ethan said politely, removing his hat. "I'd like you to meet my family. My wife Nora and my daughter Ellen." The word wife caused another murmur to ripple through the crowd. Ethan felt Nora stiffen beside him. They weren't actually married yet, but he'd claimed her publicly, which was what mattered. "Your family?" Mrs. Patterson looked confused. "But I thought, that is, we heard. You heard that I ran off 9 years ago like a coward," Ethan said clearly, his voice carrying to the entire crowd. "And you heard right. But I'm back now, and I'm not going anywhere." Ellen tugged on his sleeve. "Papa, why is everyone staring at us?" Before Ethan could answer, Sheriff Burke pushed through the crowd. Ethan tensed, wondering if there was going to be trouble, but the sheriff's face was neutral. "Morrison," Burke said with a nod. "Heard you helped save this lady's life. That was good work." "Thank you, Sheriff." "Ellen Chun, isn't it?" Burke knelt down to Ellen's level. "I heard you were mighty brave, little miss. Taking care of your mama all by yourself." Ellen beamed at the praise. "I wasn't by myself. Papa came back to help us." The sheriff stood and looked Ethan directly in the eyes. "Man who takes responsibility for his family deserves respect. Far as I'm concerned, you're welcome in this town." The sheriff's public endorsement seemed to break the spell that had frozen the crowd. People began moving toward the church doors, though Ethan could still hear whispered conversations and feel curious glances. Inside the church, Ethan guided his family to a pew near the back. He could feel eyes on them throughout the service, but Ellen sat between him and Nora, completely oblivious to the attention, singing hymns in her clear, sweet voice. After the service, as people filed out into the sunshine, several townspeople approached them. Some were merely curious. Others seemed genuinely welcoming. "Mr. Morrison?" A young woman with kind eyes stepped forward. "I'm Mary Fletcher, the school teacher. I wanted to let you know that Ellen would be very welcome in my classroom this fall." Ellen's face lit up. "I could go to real school with other children." "Of course you could, sweetheart," Mary said with a warm smile. As they walked home, Ellen chattered excitedly about school and new friends. Nora was quiet, but Ethan could see she was pleased with how the morning had gone. "That wasn't so terrible," she said finally. No, Ethan agreed. It wasn't. That afternoon, Ethan rode out to look at a small ranch property he'd heard was for sale. The land sat in a valley just outside town, with a modest house and enough acreage for cattle and horses. It was perfect for a fresh start. When he returned to the cabin that evening, he found Nora and Ellen working in the small garden behind the house. How would you feel about getting married for real? He asked Nora without preamble. Nora looked up from the tomato plants, dirt on her hands and surprise in her eyes. Ethan Morrison, is that your idea of a proper proposal? Ellen giggled. Papa, you're supposed to get down on one knee. Ethan laughed and actually did drop to one knee in the middle of the garden. Nora Chun, will you marry me? Again, but properly this time? Yes, Nora said simply, her eyes bright with tears of happiness. Yes, I will. Ellen threw her arms around both of them. We're really going to be a family. A real, proper family. 6 months later, Ethan stood in the same white church, but this time at the altar. Nora walked down the aisle in a simple white dress that she'd sewn herself, with Ellen as her flower girl. The church was fuller than it had been that first Sunday, with friendly faces throughout the congregation. Doc Miller served as Ethan's best man, and Mary Fletcher stood up with Nora. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, with vows that both Ethan and Nora meant with every fiber of their being. I promise to stand by you through good times and bad, Ethan said, his voice steady and sure. I promise to never run away again, no matter what anyone says or thinks. I promise to be the husband and father you both deserve. Nora's vows were equally sincere. I promise to trust you with our future. I promise to forgive the past and build something new with you. I promise to love you for who you are now, not who you used to be. When Reverend Pike pronounced them husband and wife, the congregation erupted in genuine applause. As they kissed, Ellen cheered loudly from the front pew. The small ranch became their home, and Ethan threw himself into building the life he should have built years earlier. He raised cattle, planted crops, and taught Ellen to ride horses. Nora sewed for ladies in town and tended a garden that became the envy of their neighbors. In the evenings, they would sit on their front porch and watch the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Ellen would play in the yard while Ethan and Nora talked about their plans for the future. Do you ever regret it? Nora asked one evening, giving up your freedom to settle down with a family. Ethan looked at Ellen chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk, then at Nora's peaceful face in the lamplight. The only thing I regret, he said quietly, is the 9 years I wasted being afraid. This isn't giving up my freedom, Nora. This is finally finding it. Ellen ran up to the porch, breathless and laughing. Papa, Mama, look how many fireflies I caught. She opened her small hands to show them, the tiny lights dancing across her palms before releasing them back into the night. Beautiful, sweetheart, Ethan said, pulling his daughter onto his lap. Just like everything else in my life now. As the stars came out over their little ranch, Ethan Morrison finally understood what it meant to be truly rich. Not in gold or silver, but in the love of a good woman and the trust of a child who called him Papa. Some wounds take years to heal, but love makes even the deepest scars fade away.